Join me in welcoming Michelle Courtney Berry. Hey, Michelle, how you doing today?
I'm great, Steve. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Absolutely. So, the name of your book, Keeping Calm in Chaos: How to Work Well, Live Well, and Love Abundantly No Matter What.
Yeah.
Tell us first, though, a little bit about you and how you show up in the world.
Sure. I mean, I feel like ever since I was small, even though sometimes it's inappropriate that adults confided in me about their problems, it kind of really positioned me as being like a helper or a person who could try to stay calm. Like a lot of times, my mom was really nervous in situations. And what I learned from that is like, how do you calm your nerves? So I'd be calming my mom down. And I think, this is going to be a book one day. And I remember telling my mother when I was small, I'm going to write about this, right? How do you maintain perspective and how do you make sure that um, you depersonalize as much as possible so you can have greater health and wellness. So how I show up in the world is I want to help people de-stress so they can press reset and have the happy lives that they were meant to have. And because job stress is like 98% of our stress, and because so many of our health disorders are based on unmitigated stress and unresolved tension and burnout, I want to help play a role in the world stage in helping people de-stress so they can show up well and live and love abundantly as we were all meant to. Yeah.
I love that. You know, and then on top of all of that, we have this wonderful little thing, just a pandemic, no big deal, called COVID
Right.
that threw in a whole nother tsunami of stress onto life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write Keeping Calm in Chaos.
So I've been trying to finish it for 20 years. So if there's any other type A overachieving people in recovery like me out there, you can't write three books at once and get one done, right? So I was writing too many books at one time and I should have just been focusing on this book. But there's no point beating myself up about it. But my perfectionism and everything about not accepting anything that wasn't perfect or re-editing and editing. So like what happened with the book is I just kept working on it endlessly and feeling like it had to be perfect. And I thought, there's no such thing as perfect. If you're telling other people not to be perfect and just to shine in their light, take your own advice. So during COVID, I really buckled down and tried to tighten it up. And then I found myself like falling into the same traps as so many other people, like despair and hopelessness. And how long is this going to go on? I mean, I remember a time that we had to wipe down our food and then we were told we didn't have to. So like I was just mostly focused on surviving and not thriving. So I thought, okay, how can I take the lessons from even COVID and all the things that we learned and put that in the book? And so finally we got to a point where I was like, this book just has to get finished. And and I want to work with Steve. And we were talking about this for 2 years. So I was like, Steve needs to see my book. And it was kind of like I would look at your picture online and you would be so hopeful. And I would watch your broadcast. And I was like, Steve is personally talking to me about how you just have to finish it because it's already done. The world is waiting for it. So I think once I gave up and then when you publish online, you could change things. So I thought it doesn't have to be static. It can change, it can update. And so I thought, what could we learn from COVID? What mistakes did I make? And I've learned the hard way that people don't want you to show up in the world perfectly. So when you share with them your failures, your missteps, your mistakes, your own inability to follow your own advice, people are more likely to follow you because they're like, oh, that person's a human being. And they're not setting a standard above me. They're right there with me in this process. So how could I write a book that was like talking to my best friend? So I hope when people read it, they feel like I'm talking to them as a friend, as a neighbor, as a concerned citizen on the planet about how do we have better lives and how do we claim the happiness that we really deserve, you know?
You bring up so many great points, but let's just talk about a couple of them.
Sure.
You know, life happens. We make these grand plans and then life happens. I heard the saying once, man makes plans and then God laughs.
Exactly. Exactly.
How do we still live a powerful life when life happens and doesn't go the way we're planning?
That's a great question. I think the most important thing is to accept that the plan didn't happen. So many times we rail against my plan didn't happen, or we're angry with another person because they didn't follow our vision. Like we sometimes script out how we want people to answer us, how we want people to interact with us, how we want people to love us, how what we want people to say to us. And Other people are just being themselves. It isn't personal. They're doing them, and they're doing the things that make them feel safest in the world. And they make a ton of mistakes doing because they're human. So I think getting rid of the idea that things have to happen in a perfect script, that other people have to behave a certain way, and then kind of keeping your eyes on the prize about what 3 major impacts do I want to make today? Or what 3 lifestyle shifts do I want to be a part of? Or what chaos do I wish to avoid? Or what ways am I in chaos? Like, all right, the plan didn't happen. Let's just first grieve that the plan didn't happen. But let's not keep pushing through a plan that isn't going to work. And the plan that is never going to work is to try to change another person. That isn't what you can do. So much energy is wasted on trying to change others when the most important thing is self-awareness and being mindful about your capacity, your limits, your boundaries, your resiliency, and what you're not good at, and not stepping into saying yes when you really mean no. Like, there are times when we talk ourselves into doing things that just don't feel right. So I hope that what the book does is give you the empowerment of listening to your instinct. You won't please people. So you can't have everything. You can't have your health and say yes to everything. You can't have your health and stay rigid in a plan that doesn't work. You can't have your health when your gut tells you it's wrong. But you can have a huge supportive group of people out there in the world who think just like you, that you should trust your instinct. You should be okay saying no. Like, a lot of us just don't set boundaries, and we're angry really with ourselves, but we take it out on other people, you know?
I love that so much. So we're talking about working well, living well, and loving abundantly no matter what. Let's kind of break that down into each one of those. So,
Sure.
um, in a perfect world, we would just have a wonderful job that we love every day, and there's just never any stress. And then we have to actually go to work, right?
Yeah.
So how do we work well?
Okay. A good way that we work well is that, I think at the very top, and I do a lot of work with leadership, 60% or more of our managers have no management training. So many have just been promoted up the line, right? So a good key in working well is, do you have the proper tools to even lead? Are you a boss who bullies? What kind of self-awareness do you need to bring to your A game? Because we don't quit our jobs, usually we quit our bosses. And in the toxic workplaces I've worked in and consulted for, it's just like so abundant that there's bullying and abuse. And so if the top isn't following or walking the talk, why would you expect anybody else to? So really talk about the top getting the appropriate training and the appropriate support for managing their own anger and dissatisfaction, right? So this kind of bullying gets pushed downhill. So you can't work well if your boss is a bully. You can't work well if you're bullying because you're feeling bullied, right? So we have to really eradicate our workplaces of bullying. That's a really noble goal. So I think we have to really first prepare people for toxic workplaces. So do they have the skills that they need? Do they know the law? Do they know when it's time to move on? Do they know what their rights are? So we have to educate our people on, like, what's unsafe, what's discriminatory, what's toxic, right? And then what's just somebody's like bad day, right? And how do we differentiate, right? So we first have to heal our workplaces, and we have to have the right people in the right jobs at the right time with the right training. And I think then helping our people understand the difference between stress and burnout, and finding the warning signs of burnout. We shouldn't blame burnout on employees. The burnout is on the system itself. So that's a way that we work well, is we heal, and then we also provide stress management coaching and training to people on how to know when they can't change the environment and can they still be safe. Reason why so many people want to work at home is there's less discrimination at home. There's less microaggressions, there's less attacks, right? So we can't just say, oh, go back to work and everybody will feel great, right? And some people haven't had the luxury to work at home because it's a different class status, right? So understanding, like, all those variables about working well and decreasing conflict will decrease healthcare costs. So if we decrease stress at work, we'll decrease healthcare costs, and we'll decrease absenteeism and presenteeism. All right, and then the next one is, how do we live well? I think
Well,
that.
and before we go on to live
Sure.
well, I want to repeat something you said because it was so good. In fact, I just texted it out. I commented it on here. We don't quit our jobs; we quit our
Yeah.
bosses, which is also, hey, bosses, if somebody quits, they quit you.
Yeah. Well,
Okay, I just had to bring that back out because that was so
yeah, and
good.
there's a gap in understanding of that, because we don't. it's not safe for us to say we quit because of you, right? Then bosses don't get the correct feedback. There's times, so for instance, I think like 90% of people say they left because they had a better opportunity. In the reality, like they really left because their boss was abusing them. But unfortunately, bosses think that number is like 20%, right? So because they don't often get the feedback, and we're not always sure about how honest we're going to be in exit interviews, right? So we see a lot of abuse. We speak up as much as we can, and then we finally just leave. And then, some people aren't able to speak and other people write books about it. Like, it just depends on what kind of disclosure agreements you sign. But so I would say that there's a disconnect between employee experience and how bosses are seeing that experience when people depart, right? Around living, we should remove the false binary between work and life. It's not work-life balance as if work's over here and life's over there. We've always had an integration, and sometimes they are going to spill over each other, right? If you put your dog down, you're not going to go to work and forget that happened. So work and life are integrated, and what we want to hope for is finding a way that one doesn't overtake the other. In so many cases, work has expanded into every facet of our lives that there are people who just never stop working, and they're punished when they take vacation, right? They may not get the same raises or advances, or they may lose status in the organization. The way that we work is so unhealthy. So I think understanding that work and life are integrated. And I had somebody say to me, well, rest is something you can do when you die. And I thought, that's why we're a sick nation, and that's why we're so. And so I remember when I first ran my business, I answered emails at 2 or 3 in the morning because I wanted a client to know that I was always available for them. What that did is that when I didn't answer emails at that time, it seemed like I wasn't as productive. So like, I have a cutoff time when I no longer am working. I have time that's non-negotiable for meditation and workout. I meditate the same time every day. I don't take calls at certain times. I don't answer email every time it comes in, but it takes a discipline, and it takes a relearning of how we blend these environments. And so I think when you understand the warning signs of when work is bleeding way too much into personal time, or when you're with your family but you're texting, or you're at a holiday gathering and you're sending out a spreadsheet, that isn't having a life. And so I think we have to find ways. I think that's why so many of us are entrepreneurs, is that I want to decide when I'm working and when I'm not. And I want to decide who I'm working with and who I won't work with. So that's okay. Like, boundary setting feels so much a part of having an abundant life. And around loving abundantly, I'm talking about you. I'm talking about your self-care as an act of your most precious self-love. Your self-awareness and boundary setting isn't supposed to offend others. It's supposed to shine a bright light on why we're here. We're here to live our most divine purpose and to shed light and happiness. We're not here to be so beleaguered by stress and bullying and exhaustion and nonstop chaos and fragmentation that death is the relief. That's not the purpose. We're also not supposed to be here to be worrying so much about our death that we never have a life. So if we're self-aware, if we love ourselves and we care for ourselves, that's how we can take care of others, and that's how we heal the world.
So, whether you're talking about worrying about our own death, which was a really interesting one that you brought that in, or people that we've lost, especially with, again, going back to COVID, or we talk about even the more intangible, the death of that job that you really worked to get, and then you quit your boss because it really wasn't cool, or any of those kind of things. How do we do this? How do we grieve in a way that is empowering to us, as opposed to just taking us out like grief wants to do?
That's such a great question. I think some of us never grieve because we feel that if we'll ever let ourselves grieve, we'll never come out of the hole. Some of us, I had to go to a class to learn how to cry, because I found, like, what did crying get me? When I was a kid, it didn't change anything. And crying isn't to change things, it's to give the body that physiological release of held up pain, pent up pain. I tell people all the time, you can cry privately. say the words that you wish you'd said that you didn't say them out loud. Like if you don't express a feeling, it doesn't go away. It sits inside your body. It creates sickness. So I think just if we allow ourselves to grieve when we naturally feel sad, we wouldn't feel so scared of the grief, right? And so it will take you out if you never grieve it. If you never take a sick day, you'll get sick. Like what turned out to be one all-nighter that turned into 5 will lead to weakened immunity and a sickness, make you more prone to diseases and disorder, right? So I think just giving yourself permission to say, I'm scared to grieve this because I often don't grieve. Or I have another piece that I'm working on, which is a companion to this book, which is like a trauma writing exercise book. And I started writing down all these traumas and I was going to put it in this book. And I thought, this is going to traumatize people. Like, that's not what I want to do with this book. I want it to be that you come to the trauma writing with like the right therapist in mind and a plan. But it's that when I started putting it on paper, these trauma stories, I was less afraid of them. It didn't kill me. I did handle it, and it allowed me to feel the capacity of what was rightfully sad that I hadn't grieved previously. And I had a whole team, obviously a therapist, and a coach, and a doctor, and an astrologist, a whole team. And I just I realized that it didn't kill me. It made me stronger, and it made me able to sit with a lot of people come to me with their traumas, and my work is very trauma informed. It allowed me to sit peacefully with somebody else's trauma and not feel traumatized by it and not feel like I had to solve it, that I was there to be present to the suffering, and it united us. There's a shared suffering in humanity that every day can't be grand. So there's a sadness, but I think that slipping into the abyss doesn't happen as often as we think. We're just so afraid to go there that we put it off. And I think when we give ourselves permission to say, for this I celebrate, and today for this I grieve, and then we are saying, for this I am happy, and for this I'd be grateful. If you balance those meditations, you won't be sunken. You won't sink down into the tomb of despair forever. And if you feel yourself going there, there's treatment for that. That's called depression, and it's completely legitimate and it's completely treatable. And we should destigmatize mental health completely, right? Everybody's got something. Right. So we should be able to talk openly about mental health the same way we talk about physical health openly.
I love that so much. And we could go for hours just talking about any one of those things you were talking about. But one of the things that I wanted to point out is, first you have this love abundantly for yourself, but you can't do that in a bubble. You have to have those other people around you. And one of the things you said that I was thinking, while you were saying it, is the biggest joy of community is when we actually take the time to be able to say, hey, I'm really not dealing well with this. You don't necessarily tell everybody, but you got to tell somebody. And that's then when we really understand, hey, you know what? Other people are going through it. They feel that same thing, rather than that bubble. That's what you said. You're living in this bubble where nobody else has ever felt this. Nobody else has ever lost a parent ever before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You are not alone. And if it's happening to you at work, if it's happening to you at home, it's happening to other people. And the way that we build community is to be able to talk about things that have been considered taboo, to open the floodgates of the truth. There's so many times people are coming forward telling their truth and they're getting silenced. So there are those of us with more privilege and power. It's our responsibility to carry their story if they can't tell their story. It's our privilege to speak out. It's not always safe to speak out, but there's some of us who've been called to that platform. And if we do it with the right energy, with authenticity and the truth, it will set us free. And so people who are living in those shadows of harming others, we should bring light to that. And we should bring light to their suffering because they're clearly not well, right? To want harm in the world. So there are ways that there's chaos that is extremely dangerous to us that we should avoid and learn how to manage. And then what I'm also sharing is that there's chaos that's good for us, actually. All chaos isn't bad, right? Like all conflict isn't bad, right? There's some people so afraid of even the word conflict. But conflict doesn't mean that people hate each other. Conflict in a lot of situations are people are trying to work together, but have very different perspectives or views of how to get this done. And so we should engage a lot of diverse conversation, a lot of diverse people, because we have the research that shows the more inclusive and diverse the team, the better the decisions, the healthier the organization, and the more money it makes. And so the more people express gratitude, the healthier they are. The more people who don't deny their suffering, the healthier they are. So I'm saying a clarion call to chaos can bring great enlightenment. It can bring great harm. Knowing which part of chaos you don't want to just go ambulance chasing, like every time there's chaos or conflict running into the fire. But you do want to say, like, where should I show up here and how can I use my power and my voice? And if I don't feel like I have power and voice, who has it? Like, I really think it's important times now that people feel free to speak their truth and that they have advocates. So we build that community, that strong tribe, knowing that we're not alone, that other people are out there breathing right there with us. Like, if you've gone through some of the most horrific things that you can experience, so many of us have, somebody else has. And when they speak their story, maybe you don't even write a comment. Maybe you just read that and say, wow, that was my story. Or maybe you do write a comment. But the point is, people are putting more and more out there now. Let's focus on the good of that. There's a lot of harm going on. Let's also focus on the people who have been working tirelessly forever, like, to speak truth and to hold our story, so that when we tell our story about perfectionism or childhood abuse or a miscarriage or all these taboo things that people weren't able to talk about previously, or an alcoholic parent, like, there's somebody else out there who's like, oh, that's my story too. And I think that's what unites us across all difference, is that human story, that capacity that we all want love, we all want to be recognized, we all want to be treated well, we all want to be understood.
I love that so much. So the book is Keeping Calm in Chaos, and you can get it for free today on Amazon. But give us just one little tip, just something simple that somebody could do right now that would help them keep calm in chaos.
Sure. Take 15 seconds. It doesn't take a long time. Take 15 seconds. And this is when you feel someone has harmed you, said the wrong thing, done the wrong thing, betrayed you. Don't do anything for 15 seconds. And I invite you to, like, think the worst things about them, imagine terrible scenarios in your head, rail against all the injustice for 15 seconds. And then when you're done, I need you to take a very deep breath, and I want you to let it go. And I want you to know that as insane as it seemed, that person is not doing anything personal to you. It feels that way. They're so wrapped up in their pain and their blindness and their blind spots and their ignorance that they can't see past it. They might have gotten really bad training from significant people. Like, that's their pain. That's their way of showing up. You don't have to retaliate. You don't have to let them suck joy out of your life. Give it 15 seconds and breathe it in and then let it out, because that kind of stuff will harm you. So let's be really careful about taking in too much of the negativity. And you said one tip, the other thing is, do not spend all day scrolling terrible headlines. It's terrible for our health. It won't make us stronger. Knowing every bad thing that went on won't heal. You can attend to some things, of course, but be very careful about the inputs that you take in of negative news. And then and there's negative things that we can do some things about. Figure out the top 3 things you think you can do that feels helpful for you. But the work is done with us. We can't change everyone, right? But we can heal ourselves, and we can figure out what would make me feel better. What could I do in this terrible situation, in this horrible chaos? What could I do that makes a difference right now and would make me feel good? Knowing that, like, I have an exercise on things you can change and things you can't change in the book. And you to one side you put the things you have control over, and the other side things you don't have control over. And if you have other people, the weather, and politicians on the side that you think you can control, that doesn't work, right? But you can run for office, you can write your politician, you can go to a march, or you can write, or you can advocate. But try to take on big issues in bite-sized pieces, right? Not everything. Like, people will take on 50 projects and wonder why they're burned out. What's the one impactful thing you can do? What's the thing you can do with your breath? And what can you do in 15 seconds to have your anger. There's totally nothing wrong with anger. And then process it and then think, this person is very damaged to do that. What do I need to do to keep myself safe? And then tell people that what you need help on. Don't be afraid to ask for help. You know, people are standing by, ready to be right by your side.
Love that. So, if somebody wants to go deeper with you than they can do in the book, how can they get in contact with you?
Sure. So just go to my website. It's michellecourtneyberry.com. So two L's in Michelle, COURTNEYBERRY.com. There's an information form on the site. Just fill it out. Tell me what you got on your mind, and I'll be back in touch within 24 hours.
Love that. The book is called Keeping Calm in Chaos: How to Work Well, Live Well, and Love Abundantly No Matter What, by Michelle Courtney Berry. Michelle, thanks so much for spending some time with us here on the show today. Don't forget, you guys got to get your book today for free. Michelle, thanks for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Steve. You're the best.